News Channel 8 presents New Skills for Living with your host, Tom Lavin, a healthy plan for healthy living.
Hello and welcome to New Skills for Living, a show dedicated to healing and wholeness in our community. If you've been feeling stressed or distressed, if you've had problems with irritability or anger, if you're having problems sleeping, if you're eating a little bit too much or drinking a little bit too much because you've been feeling overwhelmed or distressed, you'll want to watch our show today as we talk about a particular practice that can help us deal with those things in our daily lives and have a little bit more peace of mind, a little bit more serenity, live a little bit better quality of life. We're going to be taking a look today with our expert from the University of Nevada, Reno. We're going to be taking a look at a particular type of meditation called mindfulness. And as Dr. Andrew Weil has said, meditation and medication both come from the same Sanskrit root word. And so meditation is good medication. And our guest, Dr. Holly Hazlett-Stevens, an associate professor at the University of Nevada, Reno, is going to be going over this information with us from the classes that she teaches on mindfulness-based stress reduction. Along with being an associate professor at the university, Dr. Hazlett-Stevens is a licensed clinical psychologist who is particularly interested in stress and anxiety. Over the past few years, she has received specialized professional training in mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is an intervention that teaches how to apply mindfulness meditation practices to the many stresses in our daily life. I'd also like to mention that Dr. Hazlett-Stevens was our guest on this show, New Skills for Living, about 6 or 7 years ago when her new book at the time, Women Who Worry Too Much, had just come out. And we were very excited on that time about having Dr. Hazlett-Stevens come and talk about how she helps women who deal with anxiety in their daily lives. And that was a really great book, and Holly did a really good interview at that time. And so, Holly, it's great to have you back here at New Skills for Living. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be back.
So I think the first question we want to ask you is just real simple, Holly, and that is, how can mindfulness help with stress and with anxiety?
Well, as you mentioned, mindfulness meditation's been around for a long time, over 2,500 years now, we think.
Yes.
And more recently, physicians and mental health professionals are starting to discover just what you mentioned, that it can be very helpful for a lot of different forms of stress as well. I think one of the ways I like to explain it the best is to borrow the words from a quote of Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist who survived the Holocaust and wrote about his experiences. And it's believed that he said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And our response lies our growth and our freedom. And so if we take a stressful situation, something that we don't want to have happened, something that's challenging for us in some way, something we might even feel threatened by in some way. Usually what happens is we go on automatic pilot. We react in a very automatic sort of way that is just a product of how we've learned to respond to stressful situations. We interpret it a certain way. A whole cascade of things in our body, of course, happen. And then we react to that stress, reactivity, in various ways that we try to cope. Some that might not be so helpful, like the ones that you mentioned at the beginning of the show. And so if instead we can actually be aware that this is happening as it's happening, if we can bring this quality of awareness to all of these events that are unfolding in our body, in our mind, and outside of us as well, we might be more aware of how we're perceiving the situation in the first place, that it's necessarily a problem or something that we can't work with in some way. We can be aware of all of the things happening in our body and not react and add kind of insult to injury, so to speak, and go down that road. So mindfulness allows us to interrupt that automatic process and bring some awareness to what's unfolding in our body and our mind, so that now we're freed to respond in a more skillful and a more deliberate sort of way.
So we have about a minute left in this first segment, and can you talk a little bit more then, Holly, about what it means to respond rather than react?
Yes, think of reacting as the automatic way, that's kind of the knee-jerk habitual way of reacting to a situation.
So if our kids say something, or we're in traffic and somebody honks at us or cuts in front of us.
Exactly.
So we have a natural propensity to react.
Exactly. Maybe I grip the steering wheel and I'm full of muscle tension, and maybe my mind is, cursing at the person in front of me or whatever. But if I'm aware of that, in that moment, I can loosen my grip. I can see my thoughts are just thoughts, and I don't have to be enslaved by them and buy into them. And that would be responding.
Excellent, excellent, Holly. This first segment has been really wonderful, as Holly has provided us with some really great information, and we'll see you right after this brief break. So hello and welcome back to New Skills for Living. You'll see up on your screen some information about a website, easeap.com, and you can go to that website and you'll be able to see Dr. Hazlett Stevens' interview in the future. There are also 25 or 30 other interviews from the New Skills for Living show on that website that you can view in streaming video. Also, I want to remind you, those of you that have watched the show, or if you haven't watched the show before, if you go to that website, easeap.com, there are over 90 newsletters there that you can read or send to friends that talk about stress. They talk about meditation and mindfulness. They talk about depression, anxiety, relationships, and so you might want to go to the website if you'd like to see that information. So now we want to get back to our guest, Dr. Holly Hazlett Stevens. And Holly, we started off talking about mindfulness, and I'd like us to return to that right now. Can you tell us what is mindfulness?
Sure. It's a word that's really referring to a quality of awareness, or a way of paying attention. So as I already mentioned, it's really paying attention on purpose. It's a very deliberate type of attention, and it's bringing our awareness to present moment experience, to what's actually happening right now around me, in my mind, in my body. So it's this paying attention on purpose to present experience, and in a way that we'll often call non-judgmentally, in a way that is willing then to see or to be with whatever it is that we find. So it's a willingness to work with whatever's here in the present moment.
So Holly, so like if someone is doing the dishes, sometimes when we're doing the dishes or folding laundry or working on the car or even going for a walk, our mind might be out in the future somewhere, it might be back in the past somewhere.
Yes.
But you're saying, be here now. Can you tell us more about that?
Mindfulness is a deliberate practice of bringing our mind into now. And you've mentioned so many great opportunities that happen anyway in our lives that can remind us to practice mindfulness, to practice bringing our mind back into the present moment and feel what it is that we're actually doing. Doing the dishes, I think is one you mentioned. It's a great example of, can I actually feel the water on my skin? Can I notice all of the sensations, all the sensory experience of doing that action? Can I notice, can I keep my mind or bring my mind back to the felt sense in my body as I'm washing the dishes and so on, and feel myself standing there in the kitchen. It's a very different way of being in that moment than, say, having your attention elsewhere and your mind off in the past or the future.
So Holly, let's stay with that a little bit. So being a psychologist, can you tell us, in terms of the value of our lives, like mentally and emotionally, why is our life better if we're here in the present moment and we're not off thinking about the future or worrying about what happened in the past? Why not do that?
It's a very fair question. What is the value of this in the first place? And really the simplest answer that I can think of is that now is when our lives are actually being lived. That if our minds are off in the future or back in the present, we're not taking in all that life has to offer right now. And so there's this sense of missing, a part of our lives going by. And these moments that we're talking about, like washing the dishes or going on a walk, they might seem very simple and almost trivial, but these are the moments that make up a human life.
Yes.
So to be actually experiencing our lives as we're living them, instead of off somewhere else and kind of half living them. Once you start to practice in this way, it can become quite profound.
Yeah, and we have a greater sense of aliveness, like a life well lived, rather than like living a life of quiet desperation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That sense of being present for my life.
Yeah. So that when we're with our child, or we're with our puppy, or we're walking and we actually see Mount Rose.
Yes.
So we're really being present to that moment in our life, and it's much richer then, huh, Holly?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly.
Yeah. Well, Holly, again, thank you so much for this segment. And then right after this brief break, we're going to continue talking with Dr. Holly Hazlett-Stevens from the University of Nevada, Reno. Hello and welcome back. We're talking with Dr. Holly Hazlett-Stevens about mindfulness practice and how that can make a real difference in our life. So, Holly, tell us more about mindfulness practice.
Sure. Well, of course, the traditional ancient way of practicing and cultivating mindfulness is through formal mindfulness meditation. And when we teach these meditation practices, like in mindfulness-based stress reduction, we have people start by doing something very simple, maybe eating a piece of food, or just getting an experience of doing something they'd normally do anyway, but with this full awareness that we've been talking about. And then what we'll do is have people sit still and have that same experience with their breath. So now, like you just tasted a raisin or an apple or whatever it is that you may have just eaten, can you taste your breath in the same way? And so the feeling of the breath coming in and out of the body, this is where we happen to start when we teach mindfulness meditation in MBSR. Just, it becomes an anchor for our awareness. Because as we talked about before, the mind likes to go off.
Yes.
And it will.
Yes.
And people will see that very clearly in the first minute even of this formal mindfulness meditation practice. But it's a way of starting to train the mind to come back into the present moment and into the felt sense of experience in the body. So that's where we often start. And there are a lot of specific practices where we'll guide people's minds through different areas of the body. There's one practice called the body scan, where we'll systematically move the mind through the body to get people back into the felt sense of what it's like to live in the body. So often when our minds go off, we're disconnected then from the felt sense of our body. And as we were talking about before, our body is where we live. So it's, you know, it's our way of knowing what's happening in the outside world through our senses. So this can naturally be very relaxing. It also can be very challenging because people might have certain experiences that come up that are unpleasant. And that's when the chance to really focus in and practice mindfulness in the way that we've been describing can begin.
Yes. Now, Holly, as you're talking about that being present to the body and doing the body scan, and you talk about how some people might have difficult or problematic things come up. Like, as an example, this is where maybe mindfulness-based stress reduction might be helpful to someone who's been hit and physically abused, or if they have chronic pain.
Yes.
There might be like that feeling or memory in their body. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure, and mindfulness can be so helpful because it's a different way of reacting to those unpleasant experiences than is natural for most of us or habitual for most of us. Because instead of trying to push it away and then adding this struggle of not wanting what we're feeling on top of the unpleasantness we're already feeling, mindfulness allows us to see it for what it is, to allow it for what it is. And so then a certain difficult emotion or a certain difficult sensation, we get back to just that experience, and we're not adding layers of struggle or fighting ourselves on top of it. So it allows us to do that in a very microscopic sort of way, because all of our attention is focused on that felt experience in that moment.
You know, an interesting thing that you said, I think some people either have been trained or they have the idea that meditation is really like forcing all of your thoughts out of your mind and just being totally serene, like no thoughts whatsoever. But you're saying something much different, aren't you?
Yes, mindfulness meditation is a very different approach because it's really a practice of being present with whatever arises in our experience and then practicing this, allowing it and letting it be. And this willingness to work with whatever life throws my way, whatever my body happens to experience, I'm going to be willing to show up and to work with it. And it's a very different way than a lot of us have learned how to relate to our experiences, particularly the challenging ones.
And then, Holly, you were talking about the breath being an anchor. Could you talk a little bit more about that? And then also how natural it is that the mind might wander, and that's okay, just bring it back. Can you talk about those two things? You know, we have about a minute.
Sure,
Okay.
sure. Well, our breath is a very useful anchor because it's always moving through us, and it's reminding us that we're alive. It's our felt sense that we're alive, so it can be very helpful in grounding our mind into the present moment. And the mind will wander. Our minds think just like our noses smell. It's just what our minds do.
Yes.
So it's not a problem. Mindfulness meditation is just a practice of seeing that our minds have wandered and guiding ourselves back into the present moment.
And then another element, too, is being non-judgmental of ourselves or the experience. Do you have a few seconds to talk about
That's
that?
very important as well, that when we notice our mind has wandered and we bring ourselves back, it's an opportunity to practice kindness towards ourselves and friendliness towards ourselves and accepting our mind for having wandered because that's what minds do.
Because a lot of people can be afraid of mindfulness because they think they're going to fail,
Right.
or it's too esoteric,
Yes.
but there's no failure.
Yes,
huh?
it's a very merciful practice.
Very kind.
You always just start again in the next moment.
Wherever you're at. Okay.
Exactly.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Holly. And we have one more segment, and we'll see you right after this brief break. Hello. We're talking about mindfulness-based stress reduction and how it can help us if we're having some distress in our life, if we're angry, if we're irritable, if we're craving alcohol or drugs, or we're craving food and eating too much to deal with our stress or anxiety. And so, Holly, can you address that for us, please, how mindfulness-based stress reduction can help us with those kind of self-sabotaging or destructive urges or actions in our life?
Yes, absolutely. As we were talking about before, part of this reacting to stress for a lot of us involves urges to do something to feel better in the short term that might not be so helpful to our well-being in the long term. And we just talked about formal mindfulness meditation and how it's a practice of just watching these experiences rise and fall and being with them and allowing them, not having to do anything to get rid of them as they come and go. And this can be particularly helpful for people who are challenged by urges like that, because the formal mindfulness meditation can be a way of learning how to watch the rise and fall. Let's take something simple like an itch. You know, that to simply be with an itch and let it rise and fall and not have to react by making it go away. It sounds kind of silly, but if we can do that with a simple sort of experience that's uncomfortable, but we know that it won't hurt us, perhaps we can do that with other sorts of urges, such as overeating that you mentioned, or smoking, or acting on those other urges that we don't actually want to work on. I actually met someone in my professional training who was learning MBSR to teach it to others, just like I was, and in the course of the training, he stopped smoking. After trying and not succeeding at smoking cessation himself for many years, and learning these mindfulness practices taught him how to ride it out, how to ride that wave of that urge and not react to it. So it can be a very powerful practice in that way as well.
And that kind of gets back to what you were talking about at the beginning, about that gap between stimulus and response, that we don't have to react, and that's where freedom is.
Yes.
And so many people who are trapped with alcohol and drugs or food or cigarettes or gambling, they want freedom, but they can't get it, and so mindfulness can be a tool to help them.
It's a way to get unstuck from that reactivity, that stress reactivity.
So can you tell us a little bit more about mindfulness-based stress reduction classes? And then, Holly, I for sure want to hear about a class you're teaching this autumn.
Sure. Yes, mindfulness-based stress reduction is a way of teaching these practices in a very intense way over just 8 weeks of time. So it's 8 nightly classes plus an all-day practice, an extended practice on a Saturday usually. And I've started teaching this particular program at the University of Nevada, Reno, at the Psychological Services Center there. So we've offered it a few times now in our clinical training center, the Psychological Services Center at UNR, and hope to do so again in October.
So Holly, with, of course, what you teach your regular classes up at the university, but this is a special class, and the public is welcome to attend.
Yes.
People that have been watching this show and they're going, gosh, I'd like to learn that. I think that might make my life a little bit better. So I think your email is being shown up regularly, so people could email you at the university.
That's the best way.
Okay.
Yes, because it's not a course that you register for like you do at the university. It's a stress reduction class that we're opening to the community.
Yeah, so the community's welcome, and they could just email you, and you'll get back to them and give them the particulars about the class. Huh?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
So Holly, you've covered a tremendous amount of information for us. We have a couple more minutes, and I'm wondering, what else would you like to share with our audience about enhanced living and the value of mindfulness and mindfulness-based stress reduction?
You know, I think one important thing to understand about mindfulness is that it's a natural capacity all of us already have inside of us. It's not like you need to go get mindfulness somewhere outside of yourself and then you'll have it. You know, it's not something to acquire like that. It's just a very natural way of learning how to cultivate this ability to pay attention and really show up for our lives in the way that we've been talking about.
So someone can like go to classes with you for 8 weeks. They don't have to go to Tibet for a year.
Exactly.
It's not some big esoteric
Exactly.
thing. Huh?
That's what I love about mindfulness-based stress reduction is the person who developed it, Jon Kabat-Zinn, found a way to teach these practices in a very user-friendly sort of way here in America.
Holly, thank you so much. You'll see up on our screen again, if you'd like to view Dr. Hazlett Stevens' interview on the website. It's there on streaming video, as well as other interviews with Dr. Steve Hayes and other folks. Dr. Hazlett Stevens, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We'll see you again next month. You all take good care of yourself.